So in Parshas Noach, and we also at the beginning, I've got this new little contemplative image over here. I have my little person contemplating the universe sitting next to me, little Pinocchio, Jiminy Cricket there. So we're in a new month, and we're also really close to the beginning of this whole new cycle of Torah readings. We've begun again, and it's all very new and exciting. So I just want to share a few ideas about Cheshvan. So there's a medrash that says that when Shlomo HaMelech built the temple, he had it completed in the month of Cheshvan, and was hoping, the month of Cheshvan was hoping that the temple would be dedicated at that time, but it wasn't. It was only dedicated or put into use or actually becoming functional a year later in a different month. And Cheshvan was, in a sort of personified fashion, upset that the temple wasn't dedicated in its time. And so apparently, according to some medrash, Cheshvan was consoled with the idea that the third Beis HaMikdash would become manifest in the month of Cheshvan. There's a lot of things about the month of Cheshvan that connect it to ideas of Mashiach, aspects of transformation and actualization of the work that we did in Tishrei, filling up with all this new inspiration and new information. And then the famous quote that comes from Sikha from the Lubavitcher Rebbe, that after Tishrei, and Yaakov went on his way, and V'Yaakov holech b'darko, and now Yaakov is taking all of that inspiration and bringing it into the world at large. So that's sort of what Cheshvan is all about. It's taking all this inner work, the transformation, and now putting it into reality. So also there's an aspect of this month connected to working on the shadow aspect of ourselves. Why? Because I believe that this month is connected to Scorpio, to the scorpion, and the scorpion, we know, goes deep under the ground, buries itself, hides away. And in astrology, this is a very interesting month, Cheshvan, and there's some very interesting things to be said about Cheshvan. So it is the scorpion, and it's a water sign, which means it's connected to emotions and working with the emotions. And another aspect that connects it to the aspects of Mashiach is that it's connected to the sense of smell. And we know that when Mashiach comes, he's going to judge the world through the sense of smell, which is in of itself a very interesting idea, that when Adam and Chava were in Gan Eden, all the senses got affected by their sin, except for some reason the chush, the sense of smell, and that's going to come into more of its prominence, I guess. The sense of smell is going to come more into its prominence when Mashiach comes, because imagine that two plaintiffs are coming to a court case, and Mashiach is, confronted with the different information, and how's he going to determine what's true and what's not true, who's guilty and who's innocent, he's going to have his ability to smell out the truth. So this is pretty amazing. It's connected to the idea of, I think, all of us becoming more sensitive, and the sense of smell having this extra aspect to it. So it's connected to personal transformation. It's connected also to the letter Nun, and it's connected to the tribe of Manasseh or Menashe. And that also, that aspect of being connected to Menashe is also connected to Mashiach, because in the time when the tribes came into Eretz Israel, it says that Shimon, Reuven, Gad, and Menashe didn't want to enter into Eretz Israel right away. They wanted to stay in Transjordan because Reuven had many flocks of sheep. He was given a double portion by his father because he was the firstborn. He had many sheep, even though he lost some of the other rights of being a firstborn. So he wanted to be in Transjordan because he needed all the space to feed his flocks. God wanted to stay on the side, God wanted to stay on the side of Transjordan because apparently they were vegetarian in the time when they were in the Midbar, and they had accumulated many flocks of sheep as well. And they also had that idea of wanting to be outside of the land of Israel because apparently it was more fertile there. And we spoke about it in a previous class about how God is that power of watching the borders and guarding the edges. We spoke about that in another class. But what about Menashe? What was Menashe's reason to be in Transjordan, to not enter, not all of Menashe, but half of Menashe, to not enter into the land of Israel? So our sages tell us that when Mashiach comes, that part of Transjordan is going to be part of what's going to be the land of Israel. And Menashe wanted a taste, so to speak, of this world to come. They wanted to be there living how it will be when Mashiach comes. So half of the tribe of Menashe had this connection to this aspect, to this part of the land that will be ours once Mashiach has come. The other things about this month, about connecting it to Mashiach. I just want to see if there's anything else here that I want to say. And then there's a so the energy is personal transformation. That's the energy of this month. Now you might have thought that you've done all of this already, your personal transformation, but I guess in Tishrei, we got all the tools, we got the inspiration, we got the ecstasy, the expansion, and something about Cheshvan is now, you know, putting it into play in a different kind of way. There's probably much to say about that, but I'll leave it now for the meantime with that. One more thing, that the Nun is the letter that belongs to Cheshvan, and there's a Nun has two ways of being written. There's a little Nun, and then there's a longer Nun. And the longer Nun goes right down. If we would divide all of the Hebrew letters and imagine 3 lines, so some letters go up to the upper part, some letters go down to the lower part, and each configuration of the letter is important, whether it's going up or going down. So the fact that the Nun, or at least the longer Nun, goes all the way down to the lowest level because it's long, so that's connected to the idea of taking this inspiration and this effort and this expansion that we received in Tishrei and bringing it down, all the way down into our lower aspects, our deeper selves, our most personal places, and even the shadow aspect of self. So that Nun, belonging to the month of Cheshvan, is bringing everything right down into our lowest aspect. So, and then if I would just read briefly from the Hayom Yom, which today is the third day of Cheshvan, it would say that starting yesterday, the Hayom Yom from yesterday, Susan, you were wondering if you should learn Hayom Yom every day, and your friend convinced you to pick a different book. So I'll just tell you yesterday and today's. So from a sikha of my father, after the conclusion of Shabbat Lech Lecha, in the early years of his leadership, the Alter Rebbe declared publicly, one must live with the times. Now, I love this quote. I've always loved it. And I always make the silly joke. We don't mean the New York Times. We mean the Parsha Times. So from his brother, Reb Yehuda Leib, the elder Hasidim discovered that the Rebbe meant one must live with the Sedra of the week and the particular Parsha of the day. One should not only study the weekly Parsha every day, but live with it. See that the lessons of each part of the Parsha is that you're living with it. So it's interesting because I was learning something from Rabbi Nachman's Chassidus, and this idea of living with the Torah, a lesson of Torah or a part of Torah that you received, to live with it means that you've really internalized it and you're living with it day by day by day. It's there for you. You connected to it. It's with you. You're trying to see how it applies to you. And so that's what it means to live with the Torah. Corinna, you're there, right? Because I kind of lost you. I think people who didn't have their video on, I lost, and I see Susan, but yeah, you are there. Okay, so good. I just want to make sure you're there. So continuing from the previous words, so Bereshis is a cheerful Sedra. This is today's Hayom Yom, even though its ending is not that pleasant. Noach has the flood, but the week ends on a happy note with the birth of our father Abraham. And then the really joyous week of the three would be next week, the Parsha of Lech Lecha, when we'll live every day with Abraham, the first one to dedicate his very life to spreading godliness in the world. And Abraham bequeathed his self-sacrifice as an inheritance to all Jews. So self-sacrifice, so the Hebrew term, thank you for that, Karina. The Hebrew term is Mesirat Nefesh, which means that Avraham Avinu served Hashem with such a passion, and he spread godliness. He was the first to dedicate his very life to spreading godliness in the world, and he bequeathed the self-sacrifice as an inheritance to every Jew. I guess this is how we see Chabad Shluchim able to go out into the world, into all the different places that they go, and with complete self-sacrifice. They don't have a mikveh, they don't have a school, they don't have this, they don't have that, and somehow with encouragement of the teachings of their Rebbe, our Rebbe, they just do it. Self-sacrifice doesn't mean giving up your life, like you don't have to stand in front of a firing squad and take a bullet, but it means that you give over your life, and that's the priority. So Avraham Avinu has given that to all of us, whatever it means in our own personal and individual way. What does it mean to serve Hashem with that kind of self-sacrifice? It means everything else is secondary to doing that with that kind of commitment. So if we're living with the times, and we can certainly relate to the fact that now we are in Parshas Noach, in Sefer Bereshis, and Parshas Noach is about flooding, right? The flood, the overwhelmingness. We know that in Chassidus, the interpretation was often brought many, many times over, that when the mashal of the flooding waters of Noach's flood, with the waters coming from below and the waters coming from above, correspond to a certain time in history when the world was flooded with new information. That if we go to the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, this is the example that's often given. If we go to the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, it corresponds roughly, I'm not quite sure if it was the birth of the Baal Shem Tov or the beginning, I guess the birth of the Baal Shem Tov 2 generations later, the writing of the Tanya. But Chassidus and Chabad Chassidus particularly has talked about this flooding of information from the heavens, new lights of Torah coming down, the story of Chassidus, the light of Chassidus, that coming from above, and all this new information coming from below, the Industrial Revolution, and that's coming up from below, and that's like a kind of a flooding of information. Well, that's a nice analogy, and we've learned it and heard about it many, many times, but I'd say that right now we're living in such a story all over again, where there's a flooding of light onto the planet, a flooding of information onto the planet. Technology is flying through the roof. I'm talking to you now on a Zoom chat. As I said so many times, you're not here with me in actual space, but we're here in intention together. And at the same time, there's so much information about a lot of things we don't want to know about. We don't want to know about all the corruption that there is in the world, but it's flooding our airways, it's flooding our newspapers. We don't want to know about all the dysfunctionality, let's say, in our communities. They wanted to take my video down last week from YouTube, but now maybe they want to take it down again. The dysfunctionality in the religious communities, sexual abuse, a lot of trauma coming out in all kinds of things, the Me Too movement, people spilling out all things that previously used to be private, that's spilling out, almost like flooding out. And at the same time, there's this light of messianic change that's also opening up, people becoming more conscious, the COVID story, forcing people to stay at home, indoors, well, not indoors, nobody's forcing you to stay indoors, but more insulated, more with yourself, more in your own space, able to, yes, Karina, yes. People able to have more time for meditation, more time for contemplation, and all these messianic prophecies coming out, the shrinking of space and time, part of a messianic reality. So in another way, it's another kind of flooding of information, flooding of knowledge, but we want it to be knowledge of Hashem. And what is the advice of the flooding? How did everyone get away from the flood? What did Hashem tell Noach? Hashem told Noach that what he had to do was to make a teva, to make an ark, and to enter into the ark. And we know that teva, the word teva, corresponds to the idea of prayer and it corresponds to the idea of Torah knowledge. So when we're walking into the teva, getting away from flooding, and I know the word flooding has also been used in psychological work. There's not men is from Mars, woman is from Venus, but there's another person who, John Gray, I think, who did Shalom Bayis workshops and talked about flooding. I just can't remember his name at the moment, but when you're in an emotional situation and you're feeling overwhelmed, it's also called flooding. So when you're feeling flooded, this Eitzah, this advice is to go into the teva. So teva means word. It can be prayer. It can be words of Torah. In an emotional sense, if you're in a Shalom Bayis crisis and you're feeling flooded, go into the teva, find the right words, communicate, speak. But in the general context that this often is referring to is the idea of prayer and learning Torah, to go into the teva to find a way to navigate over all these waves and all this turbulence. Now, we are in a time of flooding, and Karina posted, you know, the new thing that the Pope now has acknowledged same-sex marriage, and so many things have become a new normal. So for people from, you know, connected to the tree of life or connected to Torah fundamentals, a lot of it is just like, this is another crazy and another crazy and another crazy. So we could be flooded in all of that. So go into the teva, the words of prayer, the words of Torah, the words of one's internal space. I was listening just very, very briefly to this woman. Her name's Yehudis Golashevsky. She teaches online. She's actually a Breslev teacher. And I just connected for 4 minutes. And she was talking about a lesson from the Piaseczner Rebbe about meditation, how one should try to calm one's mind, and then just say one word. So the teva could be a whole construct of words, your tefillah. The teva could be a whole construct of words, your Torah reading. But the teva could also be one word or one phrase. And I think she quoted the Piaseczner Rebbe, and the phrase was something like Hashem hu ha'emes. I'm not sure if it was Yehudi's class cost. Don't worry about the class cost now, because there's no cost for the Torah class. So I think that the Piaseczner Rebbe's phrase was something like Hashem hu ha'emes. And maybe it's just 3 words, that to get away from the flood, oh, I see. The Breslev classes might have a charge for them. There's a whole long timetable of classes. And I think the website is Shifty or Shavisi, but I can give it to you after class. Send me an email and I'll give it to you after class. So, and I think there is a modest charge, but I think with all, I would be surprised if you would be excluded because of financial reasons. So maybe going into the teva is just finding one word, and that's all it is. You're just finding one word. So that's a beautiful teaching about going into the teva. Now, what I actually wanted to focus on, and I'm going to even try to share my screen, is, or I'll just read it, is in the last part of the parsha is this really interesting. I'm gonna try and share my screen. It's this really interesting part about Noach. So where is it? I got to try to find it. I thought I had it. But it's not here. So I'm not going to share it then. No, come back. Stop share. Okay, didn't really work, the sharing. I thought I got it all lined up to share, but it didn't really share. Okay. Every time I mess with this, it gets messed up, and that's not good. Okay. Speaker. Okay. So I'll just read it to you. So the whole earth was one of one language and of unified words. And it came to pass in their migrating from the east, they found a valley in the land of Shinar, and they settled there. Each man said to his fellow, "Come, let us make bricks and burn them in fire." And the bricks served them as stone, and the bitumen served them for plaster. And they said, "Come, let us build us a city and a tower with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed across the whole earth." Now, every time I learn the Parsha, the idea of the Taver and the flood and making a window in the Taver, like opening a light, and there's so many things to talk about the flood that are interesting, that I haven't really focused on them building a Tower of Babel. But there's a very interesting take on it. So all the people, descendants of Noach, they've diversified. There's many different people, and they're all of one language. They all speak Hebrew, and they decide to get together, and they decide to build a city and a tower, and they want it to go all the way up to Shemayim. And why do they want to do it? They feel like this one idea is to hold up the heavens in case there's ever some kind of danger, or there's flooding. There's different ideas of why they're building up this Taver. It says here, let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed across the whole earth. So one way of, okay, and then before, okay, so let me just, that one of the things that we shouldn't be dispersed, that Hashem shouldn't bring upon us any blow, any kind of destructive force, that they might be, sent this way and that way. So they were doing it out of self-protection in some way. Then the Parsha goes on that Hashem descended to see the city and tower which the sons of man had built. And Rashi says, first of all, it's not like Hashem doesn't know what's going on. He descended to see, he took a close look, because you shouldn't pass judgment unless you really connected to all the details. So he went down and he paid attention to all the details. And Rashi says, why does it specify the sons of man? Who else could it be? So Rashi has a very interesting little thing here. And before I tell you the Rashi, I'll just connect it, that some people on Facebook were remarking and putting up different pictures of President Obama, when there were certain moments when people were like standing and saluting the flag, or standing in a certain position, doing a gesture of respect to the flag. And Barack Obama was not doing that. He stood with his hands on his sides, and the caption read, "Look, this is where it started. This is where it started. The lack of respect, it started here," because President Obama wasn't saluting the flag. So here it says the sons of man, And it's the same idea. Who was Adam? Who was man? Who was man? Man was Adam. And what did Adam do? He wasn't grateful. He did the sin, then he blamed the woman. He denied Hashem's generosity and benevolence, and now and he blamed it on the woman. So now too, the children coming from this same Adam who was ungrateful to Hashem, the same man, the children of this same person, also scorning and not grateful for the benevolence that's coming from Hashem. So it's just a cute, yeah, I might get censored for that, but you know what? They put my video back. That's the interesting thing. They told me they're removing it and then they put it back. So there was, maybe it was much to do about nothing. But it is something that we should all be attuned to, is the lack and increasing lack of personal power and the increasing censorship going on left, right, and center. So if I had a small part in helping people be more aware of this, this is okay. Anyway, so Hashem descends and he sees that the sons of man, the descendants of Adam, are busy with that. And then Hashem says, behold, one people, there's one language for all of them, and this is what they do. Yes, this is what they do. This is what they do. So then it says, and now should it not be withheld from them all they propose to do? And then they felt that they, if there's some kind of destruction, they should make sure that they could withstand this destruction. So Hashem then says, if that's what they wanted to do, and they sort of wanted to make sure that they would endure in a wide space, let them get what they want. And then Hashem says, let us descend and confuse their language, that they should not understand one another's language. And then it says, Hashem dispersed them over the face of the whole earth, and they stopped building the city. And that's why it was called Babel, because it was there that Hashem confused the language of the whole earth. And from there, Hashem scattered them over the face of the earth. Now, I've always known the story for a long time, and I always felt that Hashem punished them because they were misbehaving and they were trying to challenge his leadership. But there's a really, really nice different way of reading this whole story. And the whole story is that it wasn't their security and their arrogance and their bravery that made them want to huddle together as one people in one big building and one big kind of insulated city and keep themselves all safe. They were in a way paranoid, and they were in a way fearful, and they were trying to keep they were trying to kind of build up the walls around them and protect themselves in some way. And Hashem says, this isn't the kind of world that I created. I created a world where people can have a diversity of being and can spread across the whole world and can discover their individuality and their different qualities and their different natures. And what Hashem did was not a punishment, but what he did was, this is not a good idea. You all gathering, trying to make yourself all the same, you are all speaking one language. I see Suri's trying to, I don't know if you're trying to talk to me, Suri, but if you want to send me a voice note on the chat, just send it to me, because I see you talking. I don't know if you're talking to me, but if you want to send me a message, send a voice note on the chat and I will see it and I will respond to you if you have something that you want to say. So Hashem says, this isn't a good idea. Everyone saying the same thing, thinking the same thing, being afraid to have a difference of opinion. I'm going to scatter them all around the world. Now, this is an incredible interpretation of the story because it goes back to the creation of the world and the idea that at the beginning of the world, there was a shattering of the vessels of creation and sparks of godliness went into all parts of the earth. And it's our job to go into those different parts of creation and find those sparks and elevate them and release them and kind of participate in this transformation of the world into a holy place. If everybody's gathered in one little place and they're all holding together in one tower, what about the diversity of experience? What about different geographies being suitable for different nations, being suitable for different cultures, being suitable for people maximizing their way of being? So I want to read some of that to you inside and bring it to some different teachers in our tradition who spoke about this. And before I go inside, I want to actually read. So this is a very nice book. In fact, it's a beautiful Parsha explanation sefer. Be, become, bless. And it's written actually by my husband's cousin, Yaakov Nagen, and it has beautiful, thought-provoking essays on the Parsha. And he starts off this week's Parsha and he quotes John Lennon. And he's a young guy, he's younger than me. And he starts off and he says, John Lennon's song, Imagine. Imagine there's no countries, it isn't hard to do. Nothing to kill or die for, and no religion too. Imagine all the people living life in peace, living life in peace. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us and the world will all be as one. But it's not really the way Hashem wanted us to all be, that we should all be the same. And it's interesting because if we think about reality in terms of today's reality and this thing of me being censored because I said something on YouTube that someone somewhere didn't like, and the fact that there was information about one of the presidential candidates that was very inflammatory, and then the New York Post got censored, and the President Trump's publicist got censored, and President Trump's Twitter account got censored, and the censorship that's going on is very intense. It's really like a dystopian novel. So when I read this explanation on this Tower of Babel, this is what I read. Now, this book was published in 2013, originally in Hebrew, and then 2019 in English, but this is what it says. The terror of sameness, devoid of all individuality, is largely associated with totalitarian regimes. In his classic novel, 1984, George Orwell describes in nightmarish terms the uniformity that Big Brother seeks to impose. Now, if we start thinking of the Tower of Babel as a Big Brother, government mandated, think the same as we all think the same, it starts being very interesting. The Netziv Ha'amek Devar on Bereshis offers a similar reading of the story of the Tower of Babel. The verse, and the whole earth was of one language and of one speech, he writes, describes an attempt to build a watchtower, a big brother of sorts that enforces uniformity of thought. From it, the tower builders can be surveyed and prevented from migrating to a land where they are free to think differently. The deeper meaning of the Tower of Babel story is the understanding that Hashem does not desire a world where everyone is alike. Rather, Hashem expects us to reveal our inimitable selves and revel in our unique identities as individuals and as communities. And the grand challenge is to retain our individuality within the communal setting to safeguard the self in a variegated society. Now, I thought that was so interesting that he quotes the illusion of this imaginary world that John Lennon somehow thinks is going to be, you know, something beautiful. But in fact, Kabbalah and the Kabbalah of the Ari is very specific in the idea that there's that the light shattered and spread out, and Rav Kook then, basing on that, talks about this. And let me read to you from Rav Kook here. Just history populated with its rich cast of people, cultures, and languages is like the sparks scattered throughout the cosmos. The astonishing conclusion is that within every nation and culture is embedded a unique spark of holiness waiting to be revealed and raised up and rectifying reality, restoring it to a state of oneness, but not because we cling together and we refuse, you know, everybody's like in this little tower of one think, one mind. So Yaakov Nagain is talking about Rav Kook and talking about how Rav Kook recognized the evolving consciousness of many nations as their histories and their place in the world as part of a big story. So I thought that was really a very, we can conclude based on Rav Kook and the Kabbalah of the Ari that it's thanks to the dispersion and the distance afforded by the shattering that each group could evolve in its unique way, ultimately yielding the immense cultural and human diversity that we see today. The shattering is the source of all variety in reality, and the terror of sameness, devoid of all individuality, is largely associated with totalitarian regimes. So I'm going to open it up to conversation and discussion and questions, but I thought that was a really amazing take on the story. So if you're listening to this after the class, good Shabbos, enjoy, celebrate your uniqueness, and Shabbat Shalom and sei gesund.